our last class, we didn't have class last week, but in our last class, we began discussing the topic, how do you handle stress? We defined stress as the mind and body's response or reaction to real or imagined threats, events, or changes. I'm just reviewing from the last class, and we're going to do that quickly because you know how we do when we review, so we're going to run through this part. Those of you who were not in this class, if you would like a copy of the class, I have it posted on my YouTube channel, so give me an email address and I'll send you the link to it. We said that stress is caused by an external or internal stimuli. That means something you see, hear, or it can be something you imagine, something in your mind. We gave 3 biblical examples of internal and external stimuli. We talked about Saul, when they saw the stature of Goliath, 9 feet 9 inches tall, champion warrior, dressed in battle array, they were terrified. When they heard his voice, when he taunted them, they were terrified of him. We talked about Jacob, an internal stimuli, when they gave him Joseph's coat of many colors that they dipped in the blood of an animal and told him that this was your son. He thought that his son was dead. So his body responded exactly as if Joseph actually were dead, but he wasn't, right? Oh, one more. Then we talked about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was under so much stress that his body responded by sweating blood. We talked about how stress affects our bodies, how God created our bodies. He designed our bodies to respond to stressful situations. We have what's called an emergency response system. When everything is going fine, your parasympathetic nervous system is taking place, regulating your blood flow, your heart rate, everything is going on smoothly. But when a stressor happens, when you are in a stressful situation, then your body kicks in to what's called a sympathetic nervous system, where more adrenaline is pumped, more blood is pumped, your heart rate pumps blood faster. And what it's doing is you're preparing your body to respond to the stressor, either fight or flight. We call that fight or flight syndrome. Problem is, when you are in a state of readiness, when your body has pumped all of this adrenaline and cortisol, all of these things in you, preparing your body to respond to the stressor, and you don't do anything about it. We equated that to having a car in park, foot on the gas to the floor, and it's just racing, not going anywhere. What would happen eventually? The engine would blow, right? Well, that's what happens to our bodies when we don't release the stress, when our bodies is in a state of stress and we don't release it. These are some of the problems that exist. Heart attacks, strokes. I just had someone the other day had a stroke, a friend of mine. High blood pressure, hypertension, stress attacks, and other illnesses. We talked about these. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are some root causes of stress. As I said, if you want to see the video about that, then just let me know. We talked about some of the toxins that we're exposed to. Bless you.
Thank you.
These are some toxins that we are exposed to. Polluted air. The past few days has taught us a lot about that, hasn't it? Huh?
Yes.
Polluted water, polluted food, electromagnetic. These emissions from your cell phone, microwaves, and all of these things emit electromagnetic rays that affects our bodies. We talked about people. There are some people who are toxic to you. Then we talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. How that when something traumatic has happened in your life, and from time to time you will recall that event and your body will respond. You get flustered, you get frustrated, you get angry all over again, you get sad all over again. That's your body responding. Now tonight, this is where we're going to pick up tonight. How to manage stress. Because remember I told you last class that we need stress. Stress, God equipped our bodies to respond to stress. The stress response was given to us by God, and it plays an important part in our lives, an important role in our lives. I gave you an example. If you stepped out on FM 1960 and a speeding car is coming at you, what would happen? You run, dive, whatever you have to do to get out of the path of that car, right? That's your body responding. But if you didn't have that ability to do that, if you just walked out there and the speeding car is coming at you and you don't respond, what's going to happen? Yeah. So the body's response to stress is important. Now, how to manage stress? Number one, recognize that stress is a fact of life. Our bodies were designed to handle stress. Our response to stress, however, must be different. Our response to stress must reflect our faith. Question: why should our response to stress be different from anyone else's, from people in the world? Why is our response? Your hands up, sir?
For one thing, we have God.
Okay.
We not only know Him, but He knows us.
Okay.
So we have someone to lean on, to depend on. And without that, you know, I look at the world and I'm like, I don't know how y'all do it without God. I can't make it without Him.
Yeah, right. It's a scary enough place to be in with God. Without Him. So our relationship with God, right? What else?
We as Christians
Okay.
are the salt of the earth and the light of the world.
Our influence.
Yes.
Okay. I need a marker that's going to write a little bit of it.
Sometimes I feel like that stress, and sometimes when I get most stressed, the way you deal with it is a reminder of, okay, this stress is here for me to remember that I'm totally dependent on God. Because sometimes I feel like that without it, we just kind of move along and think we're doing great. And sometimes it's those stressful times that it's almost His wake-up call to us that, hey, I'm here, you need to be depending upon me. And sometimes I have found those most stressful times might be His way of getting me back on track.
Absolutely. It's a reminder. Not only that, but it's a barometer for where we are in our walk with God, in our faith. Because sometimes we think we're strong, and then we get into a situation where we realize, you're not as strong as you thought you were, right? You're not as independent as you thought you were. Our response should be different because of who we are. We are the salt of the earth and the light to the world. That means we have an influence in this world, that we should make an impact on this world. That doesn't just happen when we come through those doors. It happens when we're on the job. It happens when we're in the house, when we're out in the community. That's who sees us, the world, right? And so our response should reflect our faith. We are to be thermostats and not thermometers. What is a thermometer? That's a thermostat back there, right? What does that do? What does a thermostat do?
Control.
Huh?
Controls.
Controls what? The temperature in the room, right? So you go to the thermostat, you can set it to 65, 70, 75, whatever it is. It will determine how warm or cool this room gets based on what you set it for. But a thermometer only registers what the temperature is in the room, right? So as Christians, as influencers in the world, we should go into the world and set the standard rather than follow the standard. We don't follow what everyone else does. We follow Christ. And our response to stress should influence that, right? What message would we send to the world if our response was the same as everyone else's?
It was like the
We're
world.
no different.
Huh?
We're no different.
You're hypocrites.
Hypocrites?
But you can't trust God.
Yeah. How many times have you seen, and hopefully not been personally involved in, but I have seen many times where a Christian responded to something in a certain way, and someone in the world said, I thought you were a Christian. You people supposed to, I've heard that. That's because our response was no different. And even they recognize that our response should be different. When they make statements like that, they recognize that our response should be different, right? But it's a poor reflection of our relationship with God. It's a poor reflection of our faith. But it's also a barometer of where your faith is. Because as I said, you can think you're strong, and then you get into a situation and find out you're not as strong as you thought you were, based upon how you handled that situation, how you responded to it. You remember I said perspective is the key. Perspective is how you see the situation. Your perspective is going to influence your attitude, how you feel about the situation. Your attitude is going to affect your response, what you do about the situation. And how you respond is going to determine the outcome, the results, how it works out, right? Now, number 2, how to manage stress. Well, just said that. Develop a divine perspective. Why? Because our perspective will determine our response. Just like my sister said, if we're in a relationship with God when stressful things happen, we turn to God. Because we recognize that He's in control. He's in ultimate control of the situation. He has the power to do something about it. He has the power to enable you to deal with it. Isn't that right? And so that's going to affect how you respond to it. Now, our response will reflect our faith. Our faith will glorify God and influence the world. We're going to look at Job in a second. You remember Job? You remember what happened to Job? What happened to him?
Just about everything that could go wrong.
Huh? Everything that could possibly happen bad to someone happened to Job. He lost all of his children at one time. He lost all of his material possessions at one time. And he lost his health. Then he had friends who turned on him because they accused him of things he didn't do. Got his wife in his ear saying you need to curse God and die. Everything bad that could happen to you happened to Job. But what was his response? Turn to Job chapter 1, verses 20 and 21. Someone else get 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Let's look at verses 8 and 9, then we're going to drop down to verses 16 and 18. And we're talking about perspective. We're talking about how we should see situations that happen, especially stressful situations.
Job 21, verses 20 and 21?
Yes.
At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. And then he fell to the ground and worshipped and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised."
So what was his perspective? God gave. God can take it away. Right? And what was his response? He worshiped God. Now, be honest. How many of you, if you went home and found that your house burned down, that your family was killed, everything bad that can happen to you happened to you when you got home, would you do that? Yes. Keep it real.
You know,
Yeah.
I think, in the moment, obviously, there's pain and you hurt, and it's hard to, in the moment, go to that place, but I know, for me, I try to go to that place, so it's an effort, it's action, it's not a
Right.
reflex, it's an activity. So I keep in mind Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good. So when bad things happen, I really try to think through it to say, where is the good here? Now in Job's situation, that would have been a hard one to try to analyze,
Right.
But I found in my little stuff, I can always find the good. It's there. It's hard to find sometimes, but it's there. You know what I mean? If you dig deep enough, you'll see God is doing some good stuff here.
And see, that's a part of having a divine perspective, because you're looking for the good in it. You're looking for the lesson in it. Because the first thing I ask when something bad happens, Lord, what is it you want me to learn from this experience? What is it you want me to see in this? What change I need to make? I ask that. That's not what I used to ask.
Right.
I used to ask, why me? Why you letting this happen to me? I thought you were, you know? But keep in mind, we are in the flesh, right?
Right.
We are human. God understands that. Jesus was in the flesh in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus said, Lord, if it's possible, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. But the most important part of his statement was, nevertheless, not as I will, but thy will be done. You see? So we have those moments in our flesh, in our humanity, where we may question something, but understand ultimately God is in control. And if he allows it to happen, he has a reason for it. And it's for your benefit, even though you may not see it. Go ahead, bro.
I also think it's important that we recognize that as Christians, we're allowed to feel anger.
Right.
We're allowed to feel stress. And that doesn't mean we're weak. It doesn't mean we're sinning.
Right.
It's who's controlling it. But, you know, when you look at Job, he tore his robes. I mean, he shaved his head. There was anger. There was sadness. All those emotions. Just because he was a strong Christian man doesn't mean that he was immune from it, and we're not going to be immune
Right.
from it. So if my house burns down, I am going to be upset.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, where am I putting my value? Am I putting my value in my things?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be stressful any which way you look at it.
Right.
But it's where do we have our ultimate eye set on it?
And we're gonna address that down the line. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. We are human. We are in the flesh. God understands that. He allows for that. In Ephesians 4, I believe it is, Paul said, be ye angry, but sin not. It's okay to be angry, but it's how you respond in that anger that's going to determine, right? If someone cuts you off from the road, you know, and there are a lot of road rage incidences on the road because someone cut someone off and then they're chasing them down and they're having a shootout on the freeway. All because they were angry, but that's how they responded to it. Go ahead, sis.
I was just gonna say, it's amazing that we're talking about this. I met a former colleague at Starbucks. I was supposed to meet her at 5.
Mm-hmm.
She showed up about 8 minutes after 6. But that's all right because I've always got my armor. I always got my armor, so I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing. And at the end of that first page, I'm sitting out on the patio area and I'm thinking, okay, Joanne, what are you supposed to get from this? And then I did my assessment and she showed up and it was all good. Because I'm believing that was divine leading me to sit out there at Starbucks and just me and God.
I had you sit there stewing about the fact that she didn't get there on time. When she got there, it would not have been pretty. The whole moment would have been ruined, right? A divine perspective can influence a worldly perspective. You remember when Saul and Goliath was taunting the armies of Israel? And Saul was terrified because he heard the voice of the giant, he saw the stature of the giant, right? And then David came along and said, I'll fight him, right? Saul's response was, you can't fight this man. This man is a champion warrior. No, he said, you are but a youth. This man has been a champion from his youth for a long time. That was Saul's response. But when David came along and David said, I have a track record with God. God delivered me from a lion and a bear, and he'll deliver me from this Philistine. Right? Saul's perspective changed. Go, and the Lord be with you. So David's divine perspective changed Saul's worldly perspective. Our perspective, brothers and sisters, can change someone with a negative perspective. It's all in how we respond, and that's part of that influence that we have. It's a part of that salt and light and that being a thermostat rather than a thermometer, right? When David told Saul, you know, his perspective, I can hear Saul saying, I never looked at it like that. I never thought of that. Because I'm sure that's not what he said, but that's what he should have said. Now, I threw this in here for y'all. We don't choose how God tests our faith.
Right?
You don't get to choose how God tests your faith. God decides how he will test our faith. Abraham was told by God, leave your family, leave your land, and then later sacrifice your son. He didn't get to choose that, right? Moses spent 40 years in the palace, lived a life of privilege. Then he was told to leave that and to go and suffer with his people. He spent 40 years on the backside of the desert, another 40 years in the wilderness going around in a circle. He didn't choose that. God chose that for him. Job lost his family, lost his possessions, lost his health, his friends. He didn't choose that. What's my point? Sometimes things happen in our lives, brothers and sisters. You know, we don't get to choose how God will test our faith. Right? Remember that. Think about that. When something happens that you think shouldn't be happening to you, just remember, you don't choose it. You respond to it. That's what God is looking for.
That's good.
Go ahead,
That's good.
Reggie.
You know, I was just gonna say, to that point there, when you go through some challenges, similar to this, you know, as God is working with each of us in his own way, we don't always understand, you know, what he's doing, you know,
Right.
the why and all that stuff,
Right.
the timing of it and all that, and it can be frustrating. But if we try to keep that perspective, you know, you manage to kind of stay on that road. I'm sure it's not a straight shot. You go left and right, but you're still moving forward, and then you get to where, you know, God needs you to be. But along the way, people are watching you.
Yes.
You know, people are watching you, and you don't even know it sometimes, you know. But people are seeing you behind the scenes, you know, how you are handling something that maybe they wouldn't want to handle or couldn't handle or think they couldn't handle or whatever. But it blesses people, even though it might be hard, it might be lonely, talking about a desert, whatever it is, you know. But God, he can use all that to still get glory from it.
Even when you can't see the hand of God, you can always trust the heart of God. If God is leading you into something, he'll be there with you. He'll provide for you. He'll protect you. He'll take care of you. You remember the story of Joseph? We talked about it. Put into a pit, sold into slavery, in Potiphar's house, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, put into prison, right? The story of Joseph covers almost 25 years. It wasn't something that happened in a week. It covered a long period of time, which teaches us something about God's timing. Because when you get to the end of the story, in Genesis chapter 50, when Joseph is standing in front of his brothers who put him in the pit, he said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And God had a purpose for Joseph being in that position, because him being in that position saved God's people from the famine. Why is that significant? Because if God's people had died in the famine, then Christ would never have come into the world, and he would not have died for our sins. So God's plan, even though we can't see it and understand it at times, trust him. You don't have to trust the process. Trust the plan. Trust God. Right? Go ahead, bro.
Yeah, I was thinking about the story of Job. When we read it, we get the privilege of having the bird's eye view. You know, we can see things going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
You know, Job didn't have that. He didn't have that privilege.
Right.
All he knew, he was going along one day doing the thing that he
Bottom
normally
fell out.
does. You know, with his wife, his kids, his life, and then all of a sudden one day, you know, his whole world essentially collapses.
Right.
And just goes up in smoke, literally. And, you know, it does us good to be able to read and see that there was this conversation going on between God and Satan.
Right.
And when God asked Satan, have you considered my servant Job? You know, we need to put ourselves in that situation, you know. God may be asking Satan, have you considered my servant Michael? Have you considered my servant Jeff, or whoever it is? Because you remember Jesus told Peter, Satan has asked to sift you
Like wheat.
like wheat.
Yeah.
And so, Satan can only go so far. And there's these things going on, these conversations being had about us in a spiritual realm. And we're just getting up, going to work, going to school, doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Until one day,
One day.
you get that text, that call,
But you know what?
or whatever it is.
We have this record for that reason, so that we can have that understanding of what's going on. Job didn't have that luxury. He never knew what was behind what happened to him. We have the luxury of knowing why it happened to Job, which helps us to put what we go through in perspective, right? Which helps us to understand that there, and you remember I said from the beginning of this series, there's a spiritual war going on. It's the battle is spiritual, it's not physical,
Yeah.
it's spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah.
God has an agenda, the enemy has an agenda for everything that happens in our lives, good or bad, right? And we have the luxury of knowing that by studying God's word and understanding the things that's going on that happened to them, so that we can understand what's going on with us. And our response to it, as Reggie said, someone is watching. And that's why God is allowing it, because someone is watching. Your response to a stressful situation could be the difference between someone else keeping on, or jumping off a bridge. Your response could encourage someone to hang in there a little longer. So it is important, our response. It's not just for us, it's for others as well. When Joseph was going through his stuff, people were watching Joseph. Remember the butcher and the baker in prison? They were watching how Joseph responded, right? People are watching us, whether you know it or not. And how you respond matters, not only to you, not only to God, but the people who see you. It matters. Go ahead, Joanne.
You know, I was listening to you, Brother Poole, and I was thinking about relationships. I was thinking about Job's relationship with God. Job had to have a relationship, or he wouldn't so boldly say, though he slay me.
Right.
Though he slay me, I'm going to trust
Never
him. So
forsake me.
when I go through stresses, I strive to remember what he brought me through last time. And then I remember same God. Same God through what I'm going through now. We got
Absolutely.
this.
You remember when David told Saul about the lion and the bear?
Yeah, yeah.
He was reciting his track record with God.
Well,
And
yeah.
because of his track record with God, with that, he could face Goliath with confidence. But the things that we go through is establishing a track record. Every time we are in something and go through something and God brings us through, that's another notch on our resume, as far as our track record with God. So that when you face the next thing, he brought me out of this. He brought me out of that. He's able. He may not even choose to bring me out of this. But if he doesn't, there is a reason for that. I said that we don't get to choose how God tests our faith, but we do choose how we respond to the test. Isn't that right? Our response should reflect our faith. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. What that means is, and remember I said there are two kinds of faith. There is Bible faith and there's natural faith. Natural faith only works in the natural realm. And natural faith is based on what you see, hear, taste, touch, smell. Right? But Bible faith is based upon God's word. If God said it, if God promised it, whether you can see it or not, whether you understand it or not, you can believe it. You can take it to the bank. It will happen because God said it. That's the kind of faith we walk by, we live by, right? And then our response should glorify God. Peter said, 1 Peter 4, thinking not strange concerning the fiery trials that you're about to go through, talking to those, those Jews who are about to undergo a severe persecution under Nero. He said, thinking not strange concerning, but don't suffer as an evildoer or busybody in other men's matters, but rather suffer as a Christian, because that glorifies God, right? There are a lot of people out in the world that are suffering because of how they respond badly to a situation. The road rage thing, someone cut you off, so you chase them down and you're shooting at them on the freeway. Now you're going to prison, or you killed someone, you have to live with that. People suffer. But Peter said, don't suffer like that. You suffer in your response in faith, which glorifies God, right? And then, as we said before, our response models for others when they see how we respond. Question: have you ever wondered why God allowed you to go through certain things? Is there anything in your life that you've ever gone through and you wondered why God allowed you to go through that? I have. I think we all have at some point, to some degree, right? Now,
Sometimes it's the opposite. You wonder, why has God been so good to me?
yeah. That's a good one. You don't hear too many people ask that question. But you know what? Both God and the devil has an agenda for the good things that happen to you. So he can deceive you into thinking that everything is fine, because good stuff is happening to you. But how you're responding in that good stuff and what you're doing with that good stuff could make the difference, right? Everyone has a course, and we've spoken about this a few weeks ago. All of our courses is not the same. You remember when Paul wrote in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 through 8, I'm about ready to be killed. I have kept the faith. I've fought a good fight. I've kept the faith. I've finished my course. And you remember I said everyone has a course, and all of our courses are not the same. Have you ever seen someone all their lives they had to deal with illnesses, sicknesses all their lives? Some people struggle financially all their lives, or struggle with this or that all their lives. That's their course. We all don't have the same course, but we have to finish our course. The enemy's objective is to get us to quit before we finish the course. And one of the ultimate things in quitting, committing suicide. When your course is hard and you feel like it's too hard for you to bear, and you throw in the towel and you take yourself out, you give up. You didn't finish your course.
So is the course God ordained, or is it a choice-driven course?
God has a course for all of us. Sometimes our choices determine our course. Remember in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13, 14, enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate, broad the way that lead to destruction, and many there be to go in there, because straight is the gate, narrow the way that lead to life, and few there be. You have a choice which gate you enter in at. The gate you enter in at is going to put you on a certain road, which is going to lead to a certain destination. So you choose your course. And along that course, there are things that happen to you because this is the course you're on. You see? Go ahead.
For most Christians, hardship, illness, that's where I really believe God brings that upon us, because that's where you find your greatest progress in trusting and having faith in Him.
Yes.
And then when you go through that, sometimes we have to go through it to get to it. And when you do that, then the next one, you say, well, hey, this is a snap.
You have a track record.
Yeah.
And you have motivation and encouragement. You remember I told you when we first spoke about this several weeks ago, I told you that there was a sister that I knew in the 80s, and she was always sick. She was always ill, had all kind of illnesses. She had to have her leg amputated. She had all kind of health problems. She eventually died. But I told you, I used to go to her house to visit with her, to encourage her. But her attitude encouraged me, because she would talk about the fact that, even though I'm going through these health issues, God has been good to me. God has provided for me. God has always taken care of me. That motivated me. And I went there to encourage her, and she encouraged me. But that was her course. I call it the ministry of misery. Some people have the ministry of misery, but it's how they respond to that that's going to bring God glory, and it's going to encourage someone else. You see?
One thing I try to think about when I'm going through stuff, it's not about me.
Right.
It's not about what I'm going through, it's about how I can help someone else, like you were saying,
Yes.
through what I'm going through.
Mhm.
Because when I was going through something, people look at me like, you still smiling, you still seem like nothing's wrong. I said, well, it is wrong, something is wrong, but I know who's watching over me, some good. So that, you're right, it does encourage others, because God allows us to go through things, but it may not be about us. It may be for someone else. God working through us to get to that other person. You never know.
Unless you are on a deserted island, it's never just about you. Everything we go through is going to affect someone else. Like Paul said that in, I think it's Romans 14, no man lives to himself, no man dies to himself. Everything we do, think, says, whatever, affects other people. And that's for everyone. So it matters. You see?
Yeah.
Your hand was already? Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I just want to say that, the course, it can be hard, and it cannot be underestimated or minimized, when you're in that place, you're in that pit or whatever. But my point is more to the rest of us, we have a responsibility to encourage each other. And sometimes, we don't do that like we should. And I went to church Sunday, Trinity Gardens, and a brother was preaching. He said that the gist of it is, when you go into the presence of God, you should not walk out the way you walked in, right? You should be edified in some way. And you walk in angry, you walk out angry, something happened. And so if a brother or sister is in that place, that pit, going through their struggle, be it the ministry of misery or whatever they're going through, we have to know how to love them and how to encourage them. Now, that's one thing I like about this church, because they do the little thing in the front with the greeting, and that helps. Because if you walking in there hurting, and you make it through that thing right there, chances are you feeling a little bit better after that, right? Just that little thing right there, and then you get in here, and then a good message happens too. But that's important.
Yeah.
And I think we all have to personally make it our mission to try to be a blessing to somebody that's in that place where we see that, rather than, hands off and all that stuff. Sometimes we don't want to get involved. It's too much hassle or whatever.
Yeah. Let's try to finish this time.
You got 10 minutes.
How many?
10.
Oh, Lord. Y'all can't say anything else the rest of the class. Jesus taught that we must count the cost. There is a price for discipleship. Salvation is the free gift of God. We are saved by grace through faith. But discipleship, there's a cost. And I don't have time to go through. These are the scriptures down there, and they're on your handout. Luke chapter 14, verse 26, Jesus said, if any man come after me, King James translation, and hate not his father and mother and wife and brother and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Now that doesn't literally mean to hate. That what it means is, the Greek word means to love less than. So what Jesus was saying is that if you love your parents more than me, you're not worthy to be my disciple. If you love your children, your husband, your wife, more than me, he has to be first. That comes at a cost sometimes. When you're dealing with life and you're dealing with people and relationships, and you have to put Christ before someone who thinks that they should be first in your life, that could be a problem, right? But you must be willing to pay that price. One of the biggest things for human beings to do is deny themselves. And Jesus said, if any man come after me, he must deny himself. Not only that, take up his cross. Luke 9:23 says daily. So every day we have to deny ourselves. That's hard to do, y'all, when you think about it. Now, how to manage stress. Guard your thought life. Our thoughts dictate our actions. Do not dwell on past failures or present fears. I know a lot of people trapped in past failures, dwelling on them, present circumstances, fears right now, trapped in that. We must learn to flush our minds of grudges, old grudges, unforgiveness, negative images. We're all adults in here, so let me get real with y'all for a second. How many of y'all use the toilet? Raise your hand. I better see every hand. If y'all don't use the toilet, you're dead. Right? Everyone. Oh, I forgot to raise my hand. What would happen if you used the toilet for a week and didn't flush it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, hold on.
Not a pretty image, is it?
No.
But that's what some people's minds look like.
Yeah, yeah.
Some people's minds are filled with stuff that has happened to them years past. They never resolved it. They never flushed it. They never got it out. And now they're walking around with stinking thinking, judging everything based upon the perception created by, you see? Our thought lives are critical. Well, y'all still making faces at that analogy. I knew that would get your attention. In figure of speech, that's called hyperbole, where you exaggerate something for impact. Okay? You are what you think. You are what you think. Some people think too highly of themselves. Some people think too little of themselves. I know some people who think that the sun rises and sets on them. I know some people who feel like they're not worthy to walk the face of the earth. But we derive our identity
Watch out now, watch out, that's awesome.
from Christ.
I hear you.
Our relationship with God through his son. That's not an occasion for us to be boastful or proud. Because Sermon on the Mount teaches us that we must have humble attitudes, right? How to manage stress, get your priorities in order. Set your affections, your mind, your thought, your focus on spiritual things. Much of our stress is brought on by pursuing wrong goals and unimportant things. And some people commit suicide because they do this. Because they pursue unimportant things or wrong goals and they don't achieve them. It doesn't pan out and they make the ultimate sacrifice. But when you set your affections on things above, then if I don't get that new house, it's not the end of the world. If I don't get that raise or promotion, it's not the end of the world, right? What's important? That I do my job to the best of my ability, that I represent God. That's what matters. How to manage stress? Learn to trust the Lord. That means to rely totally upon him without fear. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5-6, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not upon thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him and he shall direct thy path. The word trust there means to rely upon, to be relied upon without fear. If you have fear, then you're not totally trusting the Lord. I don't have time to give you an analogy for that. So now, why should we trust him? He's our shepherd. And you remember I explained to you the shepherd-sheep relationship, right? Sheep are dumb animals. They are defenseless animals. They have no sense of direction. But if you have a shepherd who protects you, who provides for you, who directs you, you don't have to worry about it. Jesus is our shepherd. In fact, he's the good shepherd, right? He's bigger than our problems. We are in covenant relationship with him, and you remember I talked about the benefits of being in covenant relationship with God, right? How to manage stress, led by the principles of the Sermon on the Mount. And for those of you who don't have a copy, I did a handout on a breakdown of the Sermon on the Mount. If you need one, just let me know and I'll get you one. But this is what all of our lives should be built upon. In fact, Jesus said it, you know, if any man hear these sayings of mine, and he's talking about the things he said in the Sermon on the Mount, and do them, or don't do them, it's like a man who, you know, built his house upon sand, and the winds came and the storms came and destroyed the house because it's built upon the sand. But if they hear sayings and they do them, the winds come, the storms of life come, but it won't fall. Why? Because it's built upon a rock. The principles contained in the Sermon on the Mount is the rock that our lives should be built upon. These principles should inform our lives. Our lives should be built upon that. Worry, that's taught in the Sermon on the Mount. Why we shouldn't worry. We should line up our lives with God's purpose. Fear God. Have an attitude of reverence and respect for God. Keep his commandments. Be obedient to his word. We need to discover what our individual purpose is. Remember we talked about in the earlier classes, right? Because if you don't know what your purpose is, what are the two things that happen? When you don't know the purpose for a thing, abuse and misuse. And a lot of people misuse and abuse their lives because they don't know what their purpose is in life, right? Prepare to meet him in judgment. A lot of people live like there will be no judgment. That's how a lot of people live. And then finally, take care of your temple. Oh, I don't have time to really. We may have to pick up with that next week. What time is it? Huh?
Yep, 59.
Time? Oh, I had 60 seconds according to that. All right. How to manage stress? Take care of your temple. Eat a healthy diet, exercise, rest. Do not pollute your body with drugs and alcohol or cigarettes. Why? We are stewards of our bodies, right? And we have to give an account to God for it. We must address the issue of toxicity in our lives. We have no control over some toxins. The environmental toxins, that's the plant down there, that's what it is. This is Nebraska, the flooding in Nebraska, how it flooded all of the area. All of these things affect the environment. We have no control over that, but we do have control over the food we eat, the water we drink, the chemicals that we use, the toxic people in our life. We have control over these things, right? I'll put this in the slide when I edit it. I'll put this in there so y'all can see that. We must be proactive in our own health and wellness, brothers and sisters. We must be proactive. Because if we don't, some people are reactive. You know, they just go through life haphazardly and stuff happens to them. And then when it happens to them, then they respond to that. Be proactive. You make things happen. You control the narrative of your life as far as health and wellness is concerned, right? Next week, how do you handle temptation? And we're going to begin by looking at the temptation of Jesus, because the temptation of Jesus is representative of all of the temptations you will ever face. Okay? Any questions? Comments?